your host, Roma Richardson, and you're tuned in to Zeraizera 96.1 FM. You can also find us on YouTube, and I believe we're live on Facebook as well. You can also tune in via Zeraizera's website to the Listen Live option, Listen Radio Live option that's there. So, a number of ways you can access us. And remember, you can always catch the show after, replay the show after. If you want to hear it again, if you want to share it with your friends, it's always, or family or partner, whoever. The links are always available on YouTube for later viewing and listening. But I'm happy to be here with you for another Tuesday night. And as I said, we are talking tonight about sex and kinks. Kinks, kinky, these are terms that are used in a lot of different ways. And I think they are oftentimes a little misunderstood. They get some undue, unfair stigma, and there's, I think, a lot of misinformation around kinks and who is kinky or what is kinky. And so I want to talk a bit more again about kinks. You may have caught an episode or two, I think, with we had Zarina Isaac on last year before, a while ago, talking about kinks. And so I wanted to bring it back just so that we can maybe get a little bit wider in our understanding of kinks and talk about specific types of kinks. So before we get into a whole list of kinks, and this, what I'll provide to you is going to be not a non-exhaustive list. So I encourage you, as usual, to research things on your own, because you are going to discover some kinks that I won't mention here tonight, just for time, as well as, we're talking about sex on the radio, but still I want to keep it so that we can talk about things that are able to be explored with the nuance that we have on radio. It's different when you're having a conversation face to face with somebody, when you're able to explain more, go deeper into this person. So I've chosen a few that I want to focus on, not because they're more popular necessarily or anything like that. I just randomly selected some that you've probably heard before, maybe some that you haven't, just for us to get into. So, a kink. What's a kink? Kink is any sexual interest, behavior, or dynamic that falls outside of what a culture considers typical sex, which is what Rachel Wright, a licensed psychotherapist or sex expert, says about kinks. Rachel also says that a fetish, because they just want to distinguish between kinks and fetishes. I think oftentimes we use those terms interchangeably, but they mean different things. A fetish is more specific and refers to sexual arousal that is strongly connected to a particular object, body part, material, or situation, sometimes to the point where it feels central to the arousal. So kinks are kind of like preferences that you do from time to time that might add some excitement, some newness to the moment, whereas a fetish is something, a feeling that is more consistent, a more consistent arousal need or arousal pattern. Of course, when we're having these conversations, and I think I do remember that one of the previous conversations we had about kinks was very highly tied to consent, so I'm going to be bringing that up as well at the end. But consent is important in any sexual experience, but especially when we're talking about kinks and activities, experiences, events, moments that can affect people's safety, people's security, in maybe heightened ways and expanded ways, in ways that maybe other types of sexual activity don't. So it's important for us to definitely keep in mind, and this is for some forms of kink more than other forms, because some forms of kinks are really intense. If you're talking about things to do with gagging or choking or bondage or all those kinds of things, there are different experiences that necessitate good communication in order to keep people safe and reduce the risk of any harm occurring that people don't want to occur. And it's important for everybody to feel respected in the moment, during, before, and after, because we'll also learn that with kinks, just like with other activities, but especially with kinks and some forms of kink, especially if you're talking about things like humiliation and so on, that connection with our partners is important to ensure that, one, people were able to derive the feelings, or people get as close as possible to being able to derive the feelings that they desire, but that connection maintains, and that the feeling after or during the moment doesn't affect in any negative way the actual relationship connection among the people that are involved, because communication after, what folks call aftercare in this space, is key to ensuring that the entire experience is a good one, for everyone. And people can realize, try something, try a kink and realize, okay, maybe it's not for them, but that feeling doesn't have to be exacerbated or worsened by the lack of, or caused by the lack of aftercare or during care or so on. Anyways, yeah. So consent, communication, safety, respect, they're all important things to consider and to practice throughout the experience. And it's important for us to talk about these things, we talk about our fantasies, we talk about our desires, talk about the things that we want to try, and how opening up about those things can help us build deeper connections with persons, but can help to explicitly help us chase after and actually get what it is we desire. One thing to note about kink is very self-defined, it's very subjective, and it is not the same for every person or for every society, for every space. It is shaped by culture as much as by personal preference. So we're talking about a very fluid label, because there are some things that you might consider kinky that somebody else considers typical or that is regular to them. So bear that in mind too, especially when we might be tempted to judge others, to attach some stigma or whatever kinds of feelings towards what other people are doing. Just bear in mind that kink is a very personal and individual thing, and what somebody else considers kinky, we might not, and vice versa. So first type of kink that I want to mention, or first kink that I want to mention, is age play. And I got all of these from an article that I found online, and I mean, you'll find them in different spaces, but I thought this was a long list that gave me a good bit to choose from. But age play is a consensual role-playing scenario where one person or both people or everybody in the situation acts a different age than what they actually are. So we often see, for example, whether people take on like a baby daddy kind of dynamic or a baby mommy dynamic, or we have somebody who's pretending to be much older than they are, somebody pretending to be younger than they are. People might put their hair in ponytails and put on a uniform because they want to dress like a teenager or 18-year-old, or whatever, however old it is, blah blah blah. So we're talking about consensual role play. And remember, I said, key to kink is consent. So everything here is consensual. Kink ain't involve nobody who is not consenting. Okay? So as I mentioned, it might be people acquiring, using terms like daddy or baby or mommy, whatever it is. That's with age play. And it's important for, of course, clear boundaries and consent to be established in all of these situations, especially boundaries, because when you are role playing, especially, I think it applies to all kink situations, but when you're role playing, especially, there are still lines that you might want to draw in the sand. Still things that you might not want to hear. Maybe some things bring up some things for you. So it's important for you to say, okay, well, which terms related to age play or whatever, okay, maybe daddy isn't okay, maybe you need something else, maybe you need the person to call you Mr. something something or whatever it is, right? But that's age play, pretending to be a different age than what you are. Then we have BDSM. I think BDSM is probably the most known type of kink, or the most known kink, and BDSM is kind of an umbrella term for bondage, discipline, sadism, and masochism, or people say sadomasochism. And BDSM is about consensual power exchange. So people agreeing to negotiate what roles, what boundaries, what expectations are going to be involved in the experience, who is going to be a dominant player, who is going to be the submissive one, what kinds of tools and accessories you're going to use and how you're going to use them. So whether you're going to use handcuffs, whether you're going to use gags, whether you're going to use swings, whether you're going to use straps, whether you're going to use paddles, whatever it is, who's going to be the dom, who's going to be the submissive, as in who will be giving instructions, who will have to receive instructions. And remember, all of this is consensual. All of this is pre-negotiated and predetermined and pre-agreed to. We don't want surprises unless we agree to surprises in certain situations, right? Because surprises can lead to harm, whether that is physical harm, emotional harm, psychological harm. So we want to stick within the boundaries or the bounds of what we have agreed to in any situation, whatever that situation is. And I have some notes later about some of those things, but I want to especially emphasize that when we're talking about bondage, when we're talking about dominance or domination and submission and giving instructions, receiving instructions, all of those things, we're not talking about one person dictating, the whole experience. As I mentioned, these are things that are pre-agreed to, pre-negotiated, pre-discussed, all of those things. And the false thought is that the person who is the dominant or the dom has all the power in the situation, but it's really the submissive that has a lot of the control, because the submissive is the one who guides and directs the dom, and the dominant person has to listen. That's key for a good dom-sub relationship or dynamic. So it's also important, we talk about communication. Communication ain't just talking. Communication is active listening, paying attention to what your partner is saying, as well as to what your partner's body is doing, body language, how they are reacting to whatever it is you are doing to them. I was watching, what was it? I think it was American Horror Story. And there was this scene where there were in it was I can't remember if it was a couple, but it was two people who were together in some way, and they brought a third person in, and they were having some BDSM type of activities. I think the person was bound and gagged, but the person was facing away from them, so they couldn't see what was happening to the person's face. And I think the person was actually choking. This is a made-up fictional story. The person was choking, and the person actually died because, you couldn't fully see what was happening to the person and what the person was experiencing. So you're doing this thing thinking, okay, this is just intense, we're just feeling it really strongly and blah, blah, blah. But the person was actually having a really horrible physical response to what was going on. So it's also important for reasons like those, to ensure that you're keeping up with your checking in, to ensure that you can see the person, so that you can hear the person, so that you're checking for the person's breath and things like that, that you're able to have access to the person's body, so that, like, let's say you agree that how you will say stop or whatever is a tap. Usually they say in kink spaces that you don't use words that or language or actions that you would find typically, in other spaces. So, like, maybe not use a word like stop, because you might be engaging in something where stop means, in this particular instance, stop actually means, intensify it or keep going or whatever. So you want to choose words like watermelon, choose words like umbrella, choose words like supercalifragilisticexpialidocious, words that are so outside of the norm that when it is said, your immediate response is to perk up and pay attention, because it's not part of your typical lexicon, vocabulary or whatever. So you know that it means something in that moment. So it's important for, us to really be, and so the dominant also has a lot of responsibility, right? Because you are in that position where you're the one, inflicting whatever it is. So you really have to be paying attention to what's going on with your partner to ensure that your partner remains safe. Bondage, as I mentioned, it could be about using handcuffs, it could be about scarves, using something more complicated or elaborate, like rope bondage or suspension. And so, as I mentioned, to involving these things, includes a greater level of risk. So it's important for us to pay attention to mobility, circulation, all of these things. Knowing actually how to use the things safely and properly is important too. So just don't take up things and dive in to the deep end. Don't take up things and necessarily start out using everything all at once. Build your way up and build up an understanding of the tools that you are working with and how to keep everybody safe and alive. There's also blood kinks or blood fetishes, and the blood kink is exactly what it sounds like. It's about arousal connected to blood, and is also sometimes referred to as blood play. So it could include things like cutting, needle play, incorporating menstrual blood into a scene. Some people have their different feelings about sex while people are on their periods, but there are whole kinks, around menstrual and period blood. So let's bear that in mind when we are yucking people's yums too, and when we are like, oh, would you advise? No. So people feel how they feel, and people like what they like, right? Once everybody's consenting and once everybody's safe, be okay. So it does, just like bondage, include certain risks, like you have having to know how to cut and having to know where to cut and things like that. So safety precautions in advance are important. Clean or sterile tools are important. Clear consent from everybody is important. Breath play is another kind of kink, and that's about restricting airflow during sexual activity. And that often happens within BDSM or bondage, discipline, sadism, and masochism. And this, like the others, because it interferes with or involves oxygen and how much oxygen people have, there's risk involved, significant risk involved, and is often considered a high risk form of edge play. And edge play because you kind of seeing how far you could go before you stop, because it is the getting to that farthest point that is what allows people to experience orgasm or whatever kind of release they're looking for. So people suggest safer alternatives like holding your own breath, doing different things with your breath, controlling your breathing in different kinds of ways, or incorporating power dynamics that simulate intensity without actually affecting that airflow. And of course, communication and all of those things are important. So choking might be an example here, but of course, you can, like, if you are the person choking the person, you can't be so caught up with the moment that you forget that your hands are on somebody else's, right? So you have to be fully present and paying attention to what is going on with the other person. But as I mentioned, it really does involve significant risk. So think about what alternatives might be an option for you, and think more about how to safely play around with breaths and breath stuff. Breathing kinks involve arousal around pregnancy risk or the risk of getting pregnant, such as internal ejaculation or having sex without a condom. And it's important here to mention that we're not talking about people who like condom-less sex but don't want to get pregnant and have no desire or increased arousal around the risk of pregnancy. We're talking specifically about people for whom the risk or possibility of pregnancy turns them on, even if they don't actually want to get pregnant. So people in instances like these, of course, reduce things like birth control or other protective measures that can restrict the possibility of pregnancy. And so it's more about like the idea of it rather than an actual desire for the pregnancy. There is consensual non-consent, which is a thing that I'm hearing, I think, do I say more people talking about it? I think I've been seeing it come up in more spaces in the media. I was in a conversation once where somebody brought it up. That was interesting to me, not only because they brought it up in a problematic way, but because I hadn't really heard many people talk about it. But consensual non-consent is a dynamic where people simulate or pretend that there is a lack of consent within a pre-negotiated and agreed framework. So they will agree to set up a situation where, okay, I have a real deep desire for someone to, I don't know, come into my house or whatever, and this person, obviously, you've had these conversations before. This is somebody that you have you either have a long-standing relationship with, or whatever it is. However it is, you set up the dynamic. But the importance is that it is consensual. That's why it's called consensual non-consent. So it is something that people agree to, however elaborate it might be, however many steps and weeks they use to work up to it. It is actually a consensual situation that people participate in. And yeah, I just want to stress that, because it is at its bottom line, it is about consent, just like all of these other forms of kink. And it is a good transition into cuckolding, because cuckolding is a kink too, where one person gets pleasure, one person gets aroused from watching or knowing that their partner is having sex with somebody else. And there's often a humiliation or power exchange dynamic. Sorry. So there are still, just like with other kinks, just like with other consensual, non-monogamous. Remember, we talked about monogamy and other forms of relationship types and all of those things. So just like with those, consent is key for these dynamics. We're not talking about situations like, I don't know if everyone saw on the news the cases with Giselle Pellico, whose husband was convicted of how many years in prison because he used to drug her and invite people over to sexually assault her. That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about situations where everybody knows what is happening, everybody agrees to what is going to happen, and what happens is only what has been discussed and agreed to. So cuckolding is also, I think, a big theme, a big category in porn. Husband watches plumber and his wife have sex or whatever it is. So cuckolding is another type of kink that people have. Dirty talk is also a kink. I think everybody kind of knows what dirty talk is. We have lots of ways to dirty talk now, and this might seem a little mild compared to others. It might not even seem like a kink compared to others, but remember I said that kinks are self-defined and subjective, and it does exist on the kink spectrum. And for some people, explicit language is a kink in its own right. Like, some people only use certain language, certain names for body parts, for each other, whatever, in sexual situations. And so that makes kink, that makes explicit language or dirty language kinky for them. For other people, is like a way that isn't too intense, too involved to explore, get into the kink world. Or to talk about fantasies before actually having them. So it is a way of like helping you dip your toes in certain things that you might be interested in doing. Another kink is erotic humiliation. And that is also a kink that is on a spectrum too. And remember how much I talked about how important it is for us to establish boundaries, stick to boundaries, and keep checking in, because especially when it comes to things like humiliation, it's like, okay, I might tell you I'm into humiliation. We might start it off, and I might like some of the things that you say, and then I might be like, you're gone too far. Like, I want like certain terms, certain names might be okay, but certain things no. Like yeah, those you're going to find here. So with humiliation and those things, it's important. But in humiliation, those things, all kinks is important. Definitely important for us to keep communicating. And it's also important for when people say, okay, no, that's gone too far, that we respect that and we find ways to repair. We find ways to heal. We find ways to allow ourselves to support ourselves in transitioning out of that space. Not for us to be like, abusing the person and you say, you want to do this, I know you can't take it. No. For us to respect wherever that feeling is coming from and see how we can repair it. So that might be using degrading language. It could be role playing, embarrassment. It could be something you do outside that involves other people. And it's, as I mentioned, something that is agreed to, negotiated, the bounds are established, and moved forward on. Exhibitionism. Exhibitionism is a kink where the person feels sexual arousal at the idea or the experience of being seen naked or engaged in sexual activities by other people. That might mean enjoy liking a partner or wanting a partner to watch you masturbate or get naked, change your clothes or whatever. And for some people, it is the excitement around being observed that heightens the experience. And we're talking about consensual, as I mentioned. So you feel good about people watching you or whatever it is, but that's because you know and have agreed to having those people watch you. That could be in different forms and in different spaces. Like I mentioned, it could be liking a partner watch you masturbate. It could be that you are at a sex party, at a sex club, and so you are okay with and allow some people to watch you have sex or whatever it is, get naked, whatever it is there. But the important thing is that you consent to being watched by those people. You approve them and you consent to being watched. Findom is financial domination. So it is about a submissive person transferring money or assets to a dominant person as part of a power exchange that's negotiated. Negotiated and agreed. Remember, all of these things are negotiated and agreed. So making somebody give you money when nobody wants to is not a kink, right? That is just dishonest and stealing. Gagging, I think I mentioned this earlier. Kind of, maybe not. But gagging is something that happens in intense oral sex. People might be attracted to or aroused by the reaction, the physical reaction, the sounds, the sense of surrendering, whatever it is, and that could be something that helps to get one partner, all partners aroused. It could also be about power exchange and some level of control and submissiveness involved there, and that is also about what the people in the moment want and want to derive from that experience. There are golden showers. Do you know what golden showers are? If not, look it up. But I'm sure you know about golden showers because I feel like golden showers have shown up in popular culture and in media a lot. Oh my god, I did not include other types of mess play. Like, do y'all remember Two Girls, One Cup? I that was a time, an unfortunate time. But golden showers are pee, urine play, also known as urophilia, and that involves including urine in a sexual context, which could be being urinated or peed on, or urinating or peeing on somebody, or integrating wetting into whatever it is you're doing. That could happen in the bath, outside of the bath, wherever it is. There is hypnokink, or sometimes called erotic hypnosis. This is one that is new to me. Well, at least the name of it. But it involves incorporating hypnotic techniques like guided relaxation, suggestion, or role play, which deals with altering states of awareness into a sexual context. And it could be part of BDSM for some people because there's that power exchange, that kind of having to submit to that other person. And for other people, it's about like becoming more focused, deepening that attention that you're paying in that moment, or that emotional connection. So this is something I have not heard the term for, but I've heard the concept for. So I was happy to see like the word language for it. But yeah, hypnotic techniques as part of kink. Impact play. So things like striking the body consensually, of course, whether that's with a hand, a paddle, a crop, or a whip. And it's, for a lot of people, not just about the actual striking, but about the build up to it and all of those things, the power dynamic that's negotiated. It's important, and I want to stick a pin and a note here, right? Because this applies, as I've kept repeating, to like all forms of kink, because it is so individual and so subjective, and so important to keep communicating, because what you think is a soft hit might not be a soft hit to your partner or your partners. So try out the hits before you do them, or the slaps or whatever before you do them. Understand like which areas, talk about, agree to which areas are okay to be hit and which are not. Like, I might be okay with you slapping me on my hip or my behind or whatever, but not on my face. I grew up learning, hearing a slap in the face is a certain kind of, that's fighting actions, right? So, but some people might want that, and that might be what they desire in that moment. So it's important for us not to assume, but for us to actually have conversations about these things, because I think too, we get into sex, we get into kinks and so on, we assume that because we want to do the same thing, that we want to do that thing in the same ways, to the same degrees and intensities, and that's just not true. So it's important for us to talk about what tools we're using, what accessories we're using, where we're using them, test out some of the hits to see what is okay and what is not. Whatever we agree to, stick with it. Orgasm control is another type of kink, and that is about one partner guiding when or if the other person gets to have when or if the other person has an orgasm. And that could be edging, delayed release, orgasm denial, ruined orgasms, or intentionally interrupting stimulation. And this, of course, for many is about the anticipation, the heightened awareness. It might not even at all be about the orgasm, right? But it's all of the play that's involved in the orgasm. And as I said, play too, it's important to mention too that kink is also called play in a lot of spaces. And I think that's really cool. Praise kinks are another kind of kinks. And this is something I think I see a lot on social media, like people doing the affirmations or whatever it is, and then people that's gonna be in the comments like, oh, you like praise kinks, or you have a praise kink, whatever it is. But that is about verbal affirmation, and verbal affirmation being a source of arousal for the person. So whether that is being called a good girl, a good boy, or saying I like how you did, whatever it is. But praise kink is about giving praise to somebody or receiving praise yourself, and that contributing or being part of your arousal. Role play. I've used the term role play in many of the different kinks that I mentioned, because a lot of them are based in role playing, but it is one of the most common kinks, and it involves playing characters that you are not. So outside of your daily life. And I recently finished Modern Family, and Claire and Phil, every anniversary, I think it's every anniversary, they do their role play as Mr. Bixby. And I can't remember the lady's name, but they meet at a bar, a hotel bar, somewhere else. They dress differently and they become different people. So role playing is pretending, being some character outside of who you regularly are. So, and you can take that to whatever extent you want to take it. There was one episode where I think Claire was kind of like, she want to give it up. She tired. Phil was attached to the role play scene and the role play characters, so it was kind of difficult for them to transition back. So that's also something to bear in mind, right? Like, how do we separate those parts of our lives, because we might have to come back, probably have to come back to who we really are. But you could consider extended role play, whatever that option is, but have conversations about that. And if you find that there are some things that you especially liked or like about those characters that you become, think about how you can incorporate them into your regular routines if that's what you want, or you might choose to keep them separate and special for specific moments or occasions. Right. Sex parties. It is events. We probably have them here. I've never been invited to one, so this is my expression of interest for sex party. And the sex parties are cool for a lot of reasons. One of them is that you don't have to do anything if you don't want to do anything. So you can, and sex clubs, spaces like that. So you can choose your degree of engagement, your type of engagement, and so on. Yeah, you can watch, you can participate, you can be an exhibitionist, whatever it is, once everyone consents. Temperature play, that's about using things like ice or your breath. Maybe you might exhale along a person's body. Maybe you might put that ice in your mouth and then exhale along that person's body. But temperature play is about using heat and cold to affect and amplify sensation. And I think these things are also very cool because it allows us to slow down, to really feel and experience the things that are going on, so that we get to know better what we like or don't like. Voyeurism, I mentioned exhibitionism earlier, as liking to be watched. Voyeurism is liking to watch others, so getting excitement from looking at other people when they are naked or when they are having sex, engaging in sex acts. And it can also be about listening to or hearing about sexual experiences too. So it doesn't only have to be watching. Wax play is about using candle wax to affect arousal, talking about creating heat anticipation, texture, all of those things. And it's not about pain, but more about the drip, the temperature change, all of those things that are involved. As I keep mentioning, it's important for us to, before any scenes or experiences, but for us to talk about them, to discuss what our expectations are, what our limits are, what our interests are, to establish safe words or signals. For example, a safe word for stop might be red. Remember, I said we will use words that are outside of our regular vocabulary, because sometimes our kink play might be that when we say stop, we actually mean go, and we're talking about consensual, and I can't repeat that enough. We're talking about consensual situations, so we want to choose other words because that helps better to keep everybody safe. So you could use red for stop. Don't make it too complicated that people forget what words mean, right? That you're using a word and somebody not sure if it means intensify, whatever it is, right? So while I'm saying use words that are outside of what you might normally use for your sexual experiences or whatever, your link ups, don't take it too far. Don't take it too far. Okay? Or establish what gestures you might use if you're in a situation where communication with words is not possible. So what will you do with your body to communicate XYZ, whatever it is? I also mentioned to keep checking in, communicating with the person during and after, and this is for all activities, because it's important to ensure that people are still feeling good about whatever it is we're doing. I mentioned too before, read up on things, educate yourself, understand the tools that you're using, make sure you have the right tools and equipment for what it is you're trying to do. Make sure your tools are high quality. Make sure that it's not something that gonna rip into somebody's skin if it's not supposed to be ripping into somebody's skin, if that's not what you want out of the play, right? So invest in materials and products that also won't cause adverse reactions, like things that people might be allergic to, things that can be cleaned properly, and all of those things. Practice. Remember I said practice? Like try out things before. Some folks recommend having a first aid kit handy, especially if you're doing any play involving physical risk. Make sure you have first aid kits available if anybody gets a cut, if anybody gets a bruise, whatever it is. And make sure you know the people who are involved, because while it's called play, as I have mentioned a few times, it can involve risk and significant risk. So it's important that we are in spaces and with people who we know and who we know will respect our boundaries, respect everybody in this space, respect the space and themselves. And that is what I will leave you with. Thank you so much for joining me for this conversation. As usual, I'll suggest really strongly that you see what other kinks you find. You might find that there are things that you didn't know, like I did with the erotic hypnotism, that there are terms, there's language for something that you have been interested in, something that you have practiced, something that you've seen. So I encourage you to, do some research on kinks. And with that, I will leave you and wish you a pleasurable evening, and I will see you all next time.